I want to remind you, if you can go with me back to 1996, it was a particular era in the music scene. Do you remember a band called 9 Inch Nails? Was this on your bingo card for how the sermon might begin? 9 Inch Nails, Trent Reznor, the guy who is the lead man and basically who is 9 Inch Nails with some collaborators, he wrote a song called Hurt. You remember that song? Hurt. It was like, it's ranked as one of the top 3 9 Inch Nails songs. I don't know their discography well enough to tell you if that's true or not. But this song was nominated for Best Song in the Grammys. It didn't win, but it was nominated in 1996. But you may know the song better because a few years later, in 2002, Johnny Cash decided to cover that song, Hurt. Have you heard that version? It won a Grammy Award in 2002 for Best Music Video. And last I checked this morning, it's at 309 million views on YouTube. But the story goes like this. Johnny Cash was interested in covering this song at the end of his life, and he made a recording of it, and he sent it over to Trent Reznor. And initially, Reznor was not convinced that it was able to be embodied well enough by Johnny Cash. He was iffy about it. He said it felt weird. It was like someone was kissing your girlfriend, and you were watching it. But then Johnny Cash went ahead and helped produce and make the music video that went along with his cover of the song Hurt. And he sent that over to Reznor, and when Trent Reznor watched the music video, he said all of a sudden it made sense. And as he watched this music video, which if you haven't seen it, go add to the 309 million views. It's a powerful music video. It shows Johnny Cash at the end of his life, sitting in the home that was his homestead with his wife, and he's reflecting on who he has been throughout his years. And as Reznor watched this music video unfold, he began to cry. And after the music video ended, he reportedly said, "That song isn't mine anymore. It belongs to him." He said, "A man who's a legend in a different genre and era recorded the song that I wrote, my words, my melodies. He took them and made it his own. And so it was completely different," Reznor said, "but maintained every single bit of the heart and the sincerity of the song that I first wrote a few years back." It was different, but it maintained the sincerity and the heart of the song that Reznor wrote. At the very end of Deuteronomy, chapter 31, Moses is about to die and be collected to his ancestors. And God has this final encounter with Moses. And we read that one verse. "Now write this song and teach it to the Israelites. Put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against the Israelites." This is considered the 613th, the final of the commandments that come in the first 5 books of Scripture called the Torah. This is the final commandment. Now, the way that this verse is interpreted by our Jewish brothers and sisters to this day is that when God tells Moses to write the song and teach it to the Israelites, what that is implied to mean for us today is that each of us, as God's people, are to write for ourselves a Torah scroll, to make the Torah our own. That the Torah might have been given once on Mount Sinai thousands of years ago, but it must be received again and again by each of us, those of us who belong to the people of God, Jew and Gentile alike. Write this song and teach it to the Israelites, that it may become theirs. It must be brought forward, the Torah, in every generation. It must be learned and understood and interpreted by every single person who follows the ways of God. Now, last week we began a 10-week series called the Ologies, where we're studying the important stuff called the God stuff. And last week, if you were here, you heard me advocate that each of us is to be a theologian. That, by the way, you're already a theologian. Are you going to be a responsible one, a helpful one, or not? Because each of us are gathered here in this place or online, and that means each of us have had a thought about who this God is and what this God stuff is all about. So it's incumbent upon us, just like the Israelites thought all those years ago, that each of us must learn and embody the ways of God, the laws, the way of life that is gifted to us through the living God. And how are we to think about it? Well, today we're talking about a concept called Bibliology, which is a $5 word that you would learn in seminary if you wanted to pay thousands of dollars and go for a few years. But bibliology just means the ideas about Scripture, The idea is about this thing we call the Bible. And I want to suggest to you today that scriptures are merely the specified collection of writings. So it's a specific group of writings where we can expect to have an encounter with the living God and to be transformed by that encounter. A specific collection of writings where we can expect to have an encounter with the living God and expect to be transformed by that encounter. I'm sure you've heard all kinds of things about Scripture, all kinds of things about the Bible, and I'm not here to be exhaustive about how to read it, how to understand it, what the nature of it is, what's the good parts, the bad parts, and the parts you should stay away from. Rather, I'm here to talk a little bit about how we might misunderstand it and misapprehend this thing called the Holy Scriptures. One thing we might take into a reading or an encounter with these scriptures, a thought we might have about them that can set us up for failure is this: that the scriptures are a single, simple, and straightforward in their understanding of God, their understanding of life, their understanding of how to live life with God. All of those things are not straightforward. When it comes to the different books, the 66 that are contained within this bound leather copy I have in my hand, it's not straightforward. It's not even unified. In fact, I want to suggest to you today that if we're going to read this thing called the Holy Scriptures and encounter it, it's like entering into a rowdy banquet. It's a massive table with at least 66, probably much more, voices making up the table. And at the table, they're having all kinds of discussions, all kinds of conversations that overlap and intersect with each other. And some of these conversations are joyful, filled with laughter. Some are angry and heated. Some are heavy and mournful. And sometimes they cross-talk. Sometimes they address each other directly. Sometimes they're talking to themselves and other people are overhearing them. This is the image we should hold when we come to this thing called the Bible. The canon is a conversation. And if you've ever been in a conversation, you know that you and the person you're talking to or the people you're talking to are not the same. You're not of one mind, one background, one experience. You bring your own particular understanding into the conversation. You offer your own words. And if you have a good conversation, that carries forward with the other worldviews, the other experiences and stories that enter into the dialogue. It's the same with these scriptures. It's kind of like a song, actually. This is the song of God. That's what a man who lived about 200 years after Jesus wrote. Origen of Alexandria, one of the great fathers of the early church, talked about how Scripture is the music of God. And to the untrained ear, or to the ear that's just beginning to interact with Scripture, it may sound like a bunch of disharmony. Dissonance is the word I'm looking for. It might sound like a bunch of words or notes are just clashing with each other, that we can't make sense of the progression of the song. But then Origen suggests, I think rather wisely, that as we sit and learn the song, we begin to recognize and understand its beauty. That the notes we thought clashed are actually in harmony with each other, holding different spaces, but together filling out the vocal picture, the auditory picture. Sorry for the mixed metaphors there. Then Origen says this: not only is Scripture the song of God, it is the instrument of God. That not only are we supposed to listen to and learn the song, but we're invited to play it as well, to become interpreters ourselves. So first we learn and listen, and then we take it up, and we play our own version of the song, and we add to the beautiful chorus that's been going since the beginning, that will continue long after we are gone. Now, write this song and teach it to the Israelites. Put it in their mouths, God tells Moses in Deuteronomy, which means first, we must listen to it. And if we're going to listen well, that means we have to drop all of our preconceived notions about what this thing is called the Bible. That if we come to a story or to a text assuming we already know the answer, we are not listening to it. And in fact, it might be wise for us to assume that Scripture is indeed difficult to listen to. Yes, yes, it's thousands of years old. Yes, yes, it comes from different languages. Yes, 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 it's from a different worldview and culture, and all of that makes it harder to understand. But it also demands something from us. It's not going to be easy because it wants to invite us further and further into engagement with it. We know this from life experience, right? Have you ever tried a new exercise program? Have you ever tried learning an instrument? Or maybe a new language? Did it come that easily to you? You just encountered it once and you understood completely? You were changed dramatically? No, it took effort, right? There is the expectation that you will participate, that you will give yourself to it. And as you give yourself more and more to the work, to the learning, to the endeavor, then you will see the changes occur. And yet all too often when we come to this collection of writings, we might implicitly or even explicitly assume that it's easy to understand, that it will come like that to us if God really wants to speak to us. When, in fact, I would argue that the scriptures are necessarily difficult, not unnecessarily, but appropriately difficult to demand something from us so that we might throw ourselves into it and be stretched and challenged and worn out and wearied so that we might be changed. If you notice in the scripture that Chris read this morning from the book of Ezekiel, which is always dangerous to invoke in a worship service, the book of Ezekiel. It's a strange book, even disturbing at many parts. You'll notice in that story, the vision of Ezekiel being commanded to eat the scroll, that 3 times God says, "Eat this scroll." Why do you think God said it 3 times? Do you think Ezekiel was hesitant to eat the scroll? I would be. Now, whether it's a vision or not, imagine taking a parchment or an animal skin and shoving it into your mouth, chewing on it and swallowing it. Fill your stomach, it finally says the 3rd time, which some commentators take to mean it won't be easily digested. It'll just sit there. In fact, it may give you indigestion. Some of these stories, some of these words, some of these experiences that are recorded in here are not easily swallowed and processed. They may sit in your gut and weigh you down. They may linger without an answer or an explanation. Think about some of the things that people love to invoke when they're trying to take the scriptures apart, and they name these horrible images and stories: brutality, murder, inequality, slavery, oppression, whatever you have to say about it, they're in there. And when we read them, they're not easily understood or explained away. They sit in our gut, like the parchment or animal skin that Ezekiel ate. But is that for a purpose? Do they linger there just long enough that they might begin to change us? Have you heard about animals, or I know they've studied dinosaurs called gastroliths that would swallow rocks because they didn't have teeth. And in these rocks would sit in their digestive tract. And these rocks would help break down the other food that the dinosaurs ate. Could it be these scriptures that linger with us, that weigh us down, could actually be playing a purpose that we may not recognize, helping us to understand and interpret and encounter this living God who won't be so easily grasped or contained? Stories like Ezekiel, stories like the binding of Isaac in Genesis 22, stories like the crucifixion of Jesus. These things that are not easily explained or interpreted, but sit with us, make us uncomfortable. Could it be that in that stretching, in that discomfort, God is actually working in our lives? I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a pastor, and he was talking to somebody who wanted an answer for a particular story in Scripture, and he wanted to understand it. And my friend finally landed at this: you see, you are trying to stand over the Scriptures and dissect them like a cadaver, when what you need to do is to stand under them in order to understand them. So often we come to the Scriptures and we say, I'm going to hold this thing in my hands and I'm going to tear it apart until it has meaning to me. But what if we were to sit at its feet and to listen, to be placed in its presence and to be interrogated by it. How would that change us if we sat with these words and allowed them to work on us? Because it's in that deep engagement where we drop all pretenses, where we drop our assumptions that it's easy to understand or that God speaks through the plain meaning of the text, whatever it is. What if we just sat with it and listened well? Could that be the means of transformation that God has always offered us through these words? One of the practices that I found helpful is that when I want to learn more or listen to this thing called the Scriptures, I learn from other people around me. I learned from Chris and Daryl. I learned from other people part of our community, and I asked their perspective, somebody who doesn't come from my same background. I go to the communion of saints, thousands of years of interpreters, Jewish and Christian alike, who have sat with these stories longer than I have, and I listen to their perspective. All as a way to learn that song and to have it put into my own mouth. Because I know that before I can begin speaking about it, I first need to eat the scroll. I need to swallow it and make it part of me. I need it to sit in me long enough that it might begin to work. But eventually, we too are invited to sing. Eventually, after listening and learning long enough, your voice is needed in that conversation. You need to add to the chorus that is going on all around us. And to interpret this well, to be faithful to the Scriptures, means both holding its essence while also holding our circumstances. You can't choose one or the other. The tension is that we need to be true to what it says while also be true to what we're encountering right now. And so often, bad interpretations come when we just take something that made sense a long time ago and we say, well, that's how it should be today. Whether it's slavery, household codes, how we relate to each other with laws, whatever it is, I'm sure you've encountered a bad reading of Scripture that said, this is how it's always been, this is how it needs to be today, and totally disregards the state of the world and what we're facing as God's people right now. We need to write the Torah scroll for every generation, the rabbis said, which means making it new, renewing the covenant, living into it as it is right now, while not losing its essence. That's not something that can be done by our own selves. It takes all of us together, reading, wrestling, asking questions, listening, and then coming to a place where hopefully we can be God's faithful people here and now, according to the text. There's a story told, and it's not in the Bible, so hopefully you don't give me minus points for that. But it's told by people who knew the Bible better than me. It comes from a book called the Talmud, which is a collection of interpretations about the Torah. And this story is called the Oven of Achnai. Have you heard of this story? Achnai means snake in Hebrew. And it's about these rabbis who have gotten together following the fall of the temple in Jerusalem. So the Romans have come in and destroyed Jerusalem, and everybody has left town. And they're trying to pick up the pieces. They're trying to make God's laws intelligible and sensible now that they don't have a temple or a place to offer sacrifices. And one of the things they're debating is whether or not this new kind of oven is in line with God's laws around purity. Can you use this oven while remaining ritually clean? And on one side of the debate, you have Rabbi Eliezer. And on the other side, you have literally every other rabbi in his presence. So it's like Eliezer versus everybody else. And Eliezer is putting forth every single argument for why this oven is ritually pure, why it should be acceptable to use this oven if you're a Jew in the first century. But none of the other rabbis are having it. Part of it is because Rabbi Eliezer kind of has a bad reputation and people don't like him. But part of it is that they're not coming to agreement with his understanding of the text. And so eventually Eliezer gets fed up and he says, I'm going to appeal to this carob tree next to me. And if I'm correct in my interpretation, this carob tree will do something. And sure enough, the carob tree uproots itself and carries itself 100 paces away. Now, one of the other rabbis, Rabbi Joshua, says, we do not appeal to carob trees on matters of Torah authority. So Rabbi Eliezer says, well, if I'm right, this stream will appeal on my behalf. And sure enough, the stream begins to flow in the opposite direction from what it was previously doing. Again, the stream, Rabbi Joshua says, has no place in this debate. It has no voice here. It's not accepted. A third time, Rabbi Eliezer appeals to the walls of the study hall. He says, if my interpretation is correct, the walls of the study hall will show themselves on my behalf. And of course, the walls of the study hall begin to lean inward and collapse. At that point, Rabbi Joshua scolds the walls and tells them, stay out of it. You have no place in this. And so the walls of the study hall freeze. They stop dropping their stones, but they stay leaning in honor of Rabbi Eliezer's interpretation. A fourth time, Rabbi Eliezer says, well, if I'm correct, then heaven itself will speak on my behalf. The voice of God emerges and says, Rabbi Eliezer has proven himself correct in all of his arguments. Why aren't you listening to him? And at this point, Rabbi Nathan, another rabbi, speaks up and says, the Torah is no longer located in heaven. It has been given to us to interpret. Essentially, stay out of it, God. This is our argument. Well, eventually, Rabbi Eliezer is excommunicated because they don't want to accept his ruling. The rest of the crowd says the oven is not pure. Later on, it is said, when Rabbi Nathan encountered the prophet Elijah, Rabbi Nathan asked about that debate and said, how did God react when I told him to stay out of it? And the prophet Elijah said, at that moment, the Holy One smiled and said, my children have defeated me. My children have defeated me. And said it with glee. The reason I tell you this story is because so often we are afraid to wrestle with these texts. We fear that we might be treading on holy ground, and something we say or a way we understand it might get on the wrong side of God. We are afraid of this holy God and how God might react. I tell you this story about the rabbis because they were willing to interpret and argue and wrestle as if their lives depended on it, even if it meant going against God, because they believed it's in the struggle, in the encounter with these words, that they actually grow, that they actually come to see. And maybe the good news of this story is that God makes space for it. With glee, God says, my children have defeated me. And the conversation continues. Friends, you're invited not only on Wednesday when we gather to talk more about bibliology, but you're invited the rest of your life to read these words as if your life depended on it, to learn the song, but not only to just parrot it back, but to sing it in the key of your own life, like Johnny Cash does with Hurt, like Origin commands us to. All of us are called to join the chorus of the symphony of grace that's already playing all around us, to sing loud, to sing proud, and to trust that God will smile with glee when we do so.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Weekly Teaching. To watch the full live stream of this worship service, you can view all archived streams at the Alamo Heights UMC YouTube channel. If you have any questions, email us at podcasts@ahumc.org. That's podcasts@ahumc.org. You can also visit our website, ahumc.org, anytime. Any related links are also in this episode's show notes. Again, thank you so much for being a listener. We truly appreciate your time.